Why is the world so unequal? I mean, really, it's one of the biggest, most loaded questions you can ask about human history. Well, today, we're diving deep into the answer from Jared Diamond's massive, Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's a book that basically tries to reframe 13,000 years of our story to get to the bottom of that exact question.
You know, this whole massive investigation, it all started with a really simple but incredibly profound question. A man named Yali, a local politician in New Guinea, asked the author, Jared Diamond, this point blank. He wasn't talking about abstract ideas. He was looking at the world around him and seeing this huge gap in wealth and power, what he called cargo. And his question is really the mystery we're going to try and solve today.
Okay, before we go any further, we have to get one thing crystal clear. This entire book is basically a massive takedown of racist theories. Diamond says, look, based on decades of living and working in New Guinea, there is zero evidence that some groups of people are just innately smarter than others. In fact, and this is a fascinating point, he actually suggests that survival in a traditional society might select for more intelligence, not less, because you have to be clever every single day just to stay alive. So right off the bat, if it's not biology, then what on earth is it?
All right, so to crack this case, let's start with the immediate clues. You know, the stuff you can see and touch. What were the actual tangible advantages that allowed some societies to completely dominate others?
And honestly, there's no better example of this than one single, almost unbelievable event, the collision at Cajamarca. Get this, in 1532, you've got just 168 Spaniards, led by Francisco Pizarro, facing down the Inca Emperor's army of 80,000 soldiers. The odds are just insane. And yet, by the end of the day, thousands of Incas are dead, the emperor himself is a prisoner, and not one single Spaniard was killed. Seriously, how is that even possible?
Well, the answer was a whole cocktail of advantages that were just completely devastating. The Spanish had steel swords and steel armor, which just cut through anything the Incas had. They rode on horses, which were basically the tanks of the 16th century, terrifying and unstoppable to people who had never even seen one. And yeah, they had guns, but their deadliest weapon? You couldn't even see it. It was germs. Smallpox and other diseases from Europe. And backing all this up, you've got advanced ships to get them there, a centralized government to pay for it all, and even writing to share maps and strategies. The Incas were just completely outmatched.
Okay, but here's the thing. That just explains how it happened. That's only the first layer of the onion. The real question, the much deeper question is why? Why was it the Europeans who had all that stuff? Why wasn't it the Inca emperor sailing his ships over to Spain to conquer their king? To answer that, we have to rewind the clock, way, way back.
So, to find the deep roots of guns, germs, and steel, we have to leave the battlefield behind. We need to go somewhere that seems, I don't know, a lot less dramatic. A farm. Because, as it turns out, the entire story of global inequality, it all begins with food.
Just think about it. For most of our time on this planet, pretty much every human on every continent lived the exact same way. We were all hunter-gatherers. The playing field was completely level. But then, around 11,000 years ago, something revolutionary happened in just a few spots on the globe. And that was the moment everything started to change. It was the beginning of this huge split in the human story.
The switch from hunting and gathering to farming was a total game changer. I mean, hunter-gatherer groups have to stay small and keep moving, but with farming, you can settle down in one place, and you can grow way more food on a small patch of land. This leads to bigger, denser populations and, this is the absolute key, food surpluses. For the first time, you have more food than you need just to survive today, and that surplus changes everything. And right here, you can see how it all connects. Once you have a food surplus, not everybody needs to be a farmer anymore. And that surplus feeds specialists. You can have professional soldiers, you can have bureaucrats to organize things, you can have inventors, you can have kings. Domestic animals aren't just for food, they're for pulling plows, and, of course, they give you the ultimate military weapon, cavalry. And here's the craziest part. Living side by side with farm animals for thousands of years means you're constantly exposed to their germs. Over time, Eurasian people built up immunity to diseases like smallpox and measles. But for anyone who hadn't been exposed, those germs were a biological weapon. So there you have it. Farming is the direct ancestor of guns, germs, and steel.
So the obvious question is, right, if farming is so great, why didn't everybody just do it? And the answer is maybe the most shocking part of this whole story. They couldn't. It wasn't a choice. It all came down to pure, dumb, geographic luck.
Yeah, see, you can't just invent farming out of thin air. It wasn't just a brilliant idea someone had. You need the right raw materials. You can't domesticate a raccoon or try to plant a pine tree for food. You needed access to specific wild plants and animals that were even possible to domesticate. And whether you had those or not, that was just a lottery of where your ancestors happened to live.
And it's wild when you see just how rare this was. Farming was only invented from scratch in a tiny handful of places on the entire planet. The Fertile Crescent and China got a huge head start. For literally everyone else, farming either had to be imported from one of those places, or it just never showed up.
Okay, and if you want the smoking gun of this entire theory, here it is. Let's just look at the big, useful mammals. Eurasia started with 72 wild species that were potential candidates for domestication. Out of those, they successfully domesticated 13. We're talking cows, pigs, sheep, goats, horses, the whole barnyard. Now look at the Americas. They started with 24 candidates, and they got 1, the llama. Sub-Saharan Africa and Australia, they got 0. Absolutely none. The difference is just mind-blowing. It wasn't a lack of trying, it was a lack of viable options.
So why was it so hard? Well, Diamond has this great name for it, the Anna Karenina principle, from that Tolstoy novel, right? All happy families are alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. It's the same for animals. To be domesticated, an animal has to tick a whole bunch of boxes. It needs to have a good temperament, grow up fast, breed in captivity, have a herd mentality. Everything has to go right. If it's missing just one of those things, it's a no-go. That's why we have cows, but not, say, ferocious African buffalo. And zebras, they look like horses, but they have a terrible attitude and an incredibly dangerous kick. They failed a nice personality test, big time.
Okay, so we've established that geography basically handed out the winning lottery tickets for farming. But that's not all. Geography also decided how easy it was to share that winning ticket with your neighbors.
I want you to just picture a world map for a second. Look at Eurasia. It's basically a giant landmass that's wide, right? It spreads out from east to west. Now look at the Americas and Africa. They're the opposite. They're tall and skinny, stretching from north to south. This simple geometric difference, it turns out, it had gigantic consequences for history.
And here's why that shape matters so much. Things that live at the same latitude, east or west, share a similar climate, similar seasons, similar length of day. So a crop like wheat that was domesticated in the Fertile Crescent could spread like wildfire all the way across Europe and Asia. But try moving north or south, you're crossing totally different climate zones. It's a massive ecological barrier. The corn that was first grown in Mexico took thousands of years to adapt its way north into what's now the United States. That north-south axis acted like a giant wall, slowing the spread of everything from food to technology to ideas down to a crawl.
So there you have it. We followed this chain of clues from a single battle in Peru all the way back to the wild plants and animals that roamed the earth at the end of the last ice age. So let's go back to the beginning. What's the final answer to Yali's question?
The answer, in a word, is geography. The massive inequalities we see in the world today aren't rooted in differences between people. They're rooted in the profound environmental differences of the continents themselves. It was never about the people, it was about the place.
But this leads to a pretty uncomfortable thought, doesn't it? If geography is that powerful, does that mean history was kind of predetermined? How much of our story was inevitable from the very beginning?
Well, Diamond's argument is that while specific events are always up in the air, the broadest patterns of history were basically set by the environmental cards each continent was dealt. It was almost a statistical certainty that societies on that huge connected Eurasian landmass would get the guns, germs, and steel first. In the grand scheme of things, history wasn't written by great leaders or villains, it was written by the land itself.
And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Today, we live in a world where it feels like technology has conquered geography, right? We can fly over any mountain, we can talk to anyone on the other side of the planet instantly, but how have we really escaped it? How are these ancient realities of climate, of resources, of where diseases can spread, still shaping our world and our future? Right now. Now that's something to think about.